Greetings, humans, and welcome to a very special episode of The Smoke Show. My name is Josh Smokey Hell Nelson, and joining us today is a phenomenally talented writer whose work spans many mediums. Now, we all know creative polymaths are my favorite people in the world, so without further ado, The Smoke Show is proud to present our interview with the writer of Batman and the Outsiders, Killmonger, Postal, Spider-Man, The Totally Awesome Hulk, Michael Cray, the screenplay for Zone 414, as well as being in the writer's room for Titans and Ash vs. the Evil Dead, the current writer for Blade in Marvel Comics, director, musician, and so much more, Mr. Bryan Edward Hill. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bryan Edward Hill.
Hey, how are you?
I am fantastic, but more importantly, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. I was actually just looking that way because I live pretty high in downtown LA, and sometimes you get like a single airliner that you see just kind of cross that blank space by the window. And it just looks so cinematic. It looks like some kind of cutaway or something. You do like a character in contemplation, and the airliner just kind of streaks through at an angle through all that pure blue. It's pretty nice. But yeah,
The
day's
bat,
going well.
the match cut from Lawrence of Arabia.
There you go, the match cut from Lawrence of Arabia.
Oh, that's wicked, man. I gotta agree. The West Coast is a very cinematic area of the world. West Coast, North America, for those who don't know. Mr. Hill is down in California. I am further north on the west coast of Canada, British Columbia, on a not so littleish island called Vancouver Island. Um, but enough about me. Let's get into the guest here. Every hero's journey starts with tragedy, and yours is no different. I understand you lost your father at a young age, the gravity of which
I did.
is something that cannot be understated. And I'm sorry, but this is actually a common trait that you share with some of the characters that you've worked with over the years. How
Sure.
much of yourself do you allow to be written into these characters and stories? Like, I would imagine some parts of the process to be cathartic, but I guess what my question really
Yeah.
is what balance do you seek to achieve between personally informing and pure creativity?
Hmm. That's a really good question. I mean, I think in a macrocosmic sense, in a higher philosophical sense, everyone is probably showing up in everything they create, right? In some measure, and also other people in your life who've influenced you kind of also show up. It's not something it's not a lever that I put my hand on and I kind of regulate it one way or another. It's more, I think, the minutia of our lives, those experiences have a cumulative effect in terms of evolving us into who we are, and that regulates how we respond to things creatively. What interests us and directions we want to go. So it's not something I think about consciously. It's not that kind of thing. It's just I don't really respond to a project or get interested in it, until like I have the stomach butterflies, right? And then you kind of know, okay, well, this thing is interesting to me because I'm thinking about it more. I can't get it out of my head. I'm getting some images and then the rest of it. And I do suppose that a lot of me shows up in things. I think that I do like to tell stories about resolving issues, like trauma or loss, or that kind of thing. I do tend to gravitate to stories that are about finding purpose, living through purpose. Uh, and all of that. But yeah, I just think it's sort of an organic thing that just happens automatically. If let's say I direct some really good films or something, I'll let some smart BFI person kind of put the math together on why I did what I did. I just kind of respond to things creatively and the grammar that speaks to me.
Hmm. That's very interesting. So, have there is there a great amount of projects that come across your way that just there isn't that connection, that spark?
I mean, a lot, sure. Like, look, I'm grateful to be at a point in my career where I do get a lot of things come my way, right? Like when you're starting out, you don't. When you're starting out, you're just trying to get anything going, and you'll kind of do anything and try to make it work. If someone has a romantic comedy, you're looking for a writer and you're not particularly funny, you'll try to get funny just to get that job and get it going, so on and so forth. But I'm grateful to be at a part in my career now where I do have the ability to choose what I'll engage in and what I won't engage in. And I need the challenge of a thing. I need something to push me, to challenge me, to keep my interest. Because once something becomes too easy, I do lose interest, a bit in it. I do need a new dragon to fight, like a new thing to chase. So, it's not that things aren't good that come my way and I don't engage. It's just usually like either I feel like I've done something like this before and I've said as much around these thematics as I have to say at the moment, or I just don't feel like I'm the best fit for something. Like something comes my way and I'm like, yeah, I could see how I could do this, but I know 5 other people that are optimized for this kind of work, and I'll usually just refer someone to someone else I think is a better fit.
Oh, absolutely. Instead of trying to shoehorn your talents into something where you feel you wouldn't be the right fit.
Well, the existence of my talent is arguable, but
Let's not go that
but
far.
definitely, like, something comes my way and I'm like, yeah, I don't natively live here creatively. I don't think I can create, the best experience for people, or at least a surpassing experience in comparison to other creatives that I think are just more natively um genetically constructed to be able to do these things. And so yeah, so sometimes I'll let something pass for that reason.
Hmm. Well, further going on that thread there, Elena Casagrande, the Eisner Award winning artist who has given visual magic to your thoughts, words, and ideas on the current run of Blade,
Hmm.
had this to say, and I quote: "With Bryan, I'm exploring the horror into a universe, Marvel, I never thought I could, and using a so damn cool character as Blade. It's hard because he's totally different from the characters I worked on so far, but I love this new challenge," end quote. On that subject, much of your body of work in the comic realm, from Batman the Outsiders to Killmonger and now Blade, even your screenplay for Zone 414, has inhabited a darker realm.
Hmm.
How important is the element of hope, and how pronounced do you feel it needs to be in realms such as these for the story to connect with its intended audience?
Right. Well, I've always been driven towards work that had a certain intensity. Um, we can sort of look at work and story worlds in sort of 2 different ways. I'm going to be kind of I'm going to brutally be reductive here. So one way is work that's a window, right? I think like the great films of Steven Spielberg are wonderful windows into places and realms and feelings and nostalgia and all that. And then other work tend to be mirrors, right? Look at like Michael Mann's work. You look at like Collateral or Heat or something. And these are sort of mirrors of what we're going through. And I think I've always been driven a little more towards the mirror type work, even within genre, within, something that has certain fantasy elements. Um, and the range of human experience tends to travel through intensity a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Now we don't. I mean, hopefully, we don't live day to day, moment to moment cinematic intensity, because that would drive us all insane, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
we don't actually want to be, Max in the cab with Vincent in the back and the 9 millimeter that's determining our fate. Like, we don't really want that experience actively, but there may be things about that we can relate to, right? There may have been times in our life, or probably times in all of our lives, where we felt desperation, where we felt anger, where we felt betrayal, where we felt hurt, loss, and all of that stuff. So I do like to engage those things, but I also think it's important, at least for me as an artist. I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna say like everyone should be like this all the time. Just for me as an artist, I need to not just kick an audience down the stairs, right? I need to provide something of a resolution path in my work, right? So it's like it's a sort of a two-step thing with me. It's one, story as recognition of these things, these feelings, these forces, these difficulties. If you're going to use the word dark, this darkness, right? Recognition of it in what's hopefully a very honest way. But then also, here's how we can raise ourselves up out of it. Here's how we can threshold through this stuff, right? Integration of the shadow self, with like the conscious self, and how we can move forward that way. So I do try to create that path through the work, when I'm thinking about it. But I am driven to intensity in general. I'm driven to intense situations. I'm driven to intense environments. I'm driven to intense people, often at my detriment, because um, an individual's intensity I find magnetic, right? And I find it instructive. But sometimes, that can put you in situations where you're unsafe in some ways, whether you're unsafe physically or unsafe emotionally or what have you. But I do get bored if I'm surrounded with too much pleasant, right? So I think it's likely a thing. But yeah, I do try to make sure that there's as as long and dark as the tunnel may be, I do like to make sure that there's a light at the end of it, at least, uh, in determinate measure to the requirements of the story, right? Meaning, it may not be the happiest ending, but it will leave you with something, right? I can't guarantee
Yes.
you the happiest of endings for all of my stories, but I do try to leave the audience, the reader, whatever format it is, with more than what they had going into it.
Absolutely, not just pigeonholing a Deus ex machina in there.
Well, I do think there's there is a pull towards misery porn, like trauma porn, right? Like, we're just gonna we're gonna make an independent film about someone who's a heroin addict, and they had a friend die violently, and they're wanted by the police, and it's all going to be harrowing, and there's a lot of tears and a handheld telephoto, and it's all there. I see these kind of projects, and I enjoy them, uh, much of them, but I sometimes it's like, wow, there's really nothing to hold on to here, right? There's like, this is just suffering. It's kind of endless suffering in narrative form, which is what I try to avoid. Um, but I feel like earned daylight is brighter than unearned daylight, right? And so that contrast between light and shadow, and making sure there's verisimilitude and authenticity with both, that's really what I'm aiming for in my work.
Oh, absolutely. Because I feel the traumatic experiences of our life is what stay with us the most. We don't remember the day to day things. So
Hmm.
if you can pinpoint in on that shared trauma, really pull that audience in. Yeah, I agree. There needs to be at least some resolution.
Well, because that's the thing about storytelling, right? I mean, one of the greatest aspects of storytelling is storytelling makes us feel like we're not alone. Like we watch a movie or read a book, and if the characters are going through things we can recognize, or the situations are situations we can recognize, it does eat into that sense of isolation, that sense of loneliness, that sense of no one understands what I'm going through, right? Because we all have a public persona that we sculpt over our lives to be effective, so that we can relate to the world around us and accomplish our goals and the rest of it. And then we have our private persona, right? Who we are when no one's around, which is often more emotional, right? Which is often more contemplative, more introspective. And most people, they don't necessarily get to explore and recognize that private persona in most of their lives because of the way the world is built, right? I mean, the world's built for us to mask things all the time. We have to go to an office building and be nice to everybody. We have to go to school and be nice to everyone. We have to do all these things and try to get along. And so a lot of people suffer in silence,
Yes.
a great deal. And I think storytelling is a way to speak to uh, the private persona of an audience and to let them know, like, hey, other people feel this. Other people feel this. Other people have explored it. You're not the only one going through it, and that can be a really resonant and an affirming aspect of art in general, right? And that certainly helped me growing up. Grieving a parent. Reading about little Bruce Wayne, you don't feel so by yourself, right? And I think going through that experience of having stories reduce that sense of isolation and loneliness set me on a path to want to do that with my work. Not that, you know, uh, like that kind of sociological intention is first and foremost in my mind. It's not. I mean, the needs of the art, the effect of the art sort of happens organically. But it is something that I hope happens through the work. And that hope is built on the idea that being authentic and honest, revelatory in your work, um, can lead to that effect. It's one of the things I've always been sort of natively good at, or natively willing to do. It's be very vulnerable in my work. I don't protect myself in the work, right? So I will be very honest about things I feel and things I go through, things I suffer, all that stuff ported through character, but all of it being very, very genuine. And I hope that that authenticity, that willingness to be open and be vulnerable, which in the world is becoming less of a virtue, unfortunately, uh, vulnerability. But I'm hoping that the active vulnerability, adds a little something to the work and adds something positive to the experience for the people that engage it.
Well, I speak only for myself here, obviously, but authenticity in writing absolutely comes through because you can tell when someone's just writing a character to write a character.
Sure.
If there's not some of that personal attachment coming through in some minor or major form, it's hard to build that connection unless there's something that character shares in common with said intended audience person.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to your creative beginnings,
Hmm.
what or whom was it that first inspired you to pursue writing? The one that just floored you, after which life was forever changed. For me, it was Hunter S. Thompson. The way
Oh, okay.
yeah, the way he became the story was like nothing I had digested before.
That's interesting. Like I don't know if I had that like watershed work that did it. When I was growing up, um, I wanted to be in the FBI. I wanted to catch serial killers. Like that was my thing. I mean, I had read a book. I'd read Thomas Harris's Red Dragon, and I've always been intimately interested in psychology. Uh,
Mm,
kind of just as a thing. Like the frontier of the mind really has always been something that I gravitated to. But I thought that I was gonna, join the FBI and do psych profiling, get a, double major and I don't know, like civics and psychology, and then go to Quantico. That was kind of my thing. And then my mother decided that she really didn't want me to do it. Because she's like, listen, if you have a gun, that means that you need it because other people have guns, and then there's just a greater chance that something bad's going to happen, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life worried about you every day. Because she knows me, she knows my mom knows that like I am somebody that I'm going to go through the door first. Like I'm going to be that guy. I'm going to, Special Agent Bryan Hill is the guy that wants the hard file, right? Like that's who I am. So she recognized that, and I was like, okay, well, when your mom asks you something like that, you give it some consideration. And I just liked movies. I liked films. I was a scholarship kid growing up to a private high school that had a lot of money in it. These were rich kids, and I was not a rich kid by any means. So I spent a lot of time in observation. I watched a lot. Never really felt super comfortable in the nucleus of that environment socially. But I did watch a lot, and I think the act of watching and seeing and capturing detail in the periphery of a thing, it touched base with an idea of photography. It touched base with an idea of capturing images and all of that. And sometimes photography is a way that you can redefine your environment. Kid grows up in a bad neighborhood, rundown neighborhood, not a lot of hope, not a lot of positive encouragement. You're seeing the same kind of dilapidated things every day. You're seeing the neglect. It's growing in measure and degree. Every year, right? And it can simply be your environment. You give that kid a camera and ask that kid to start documenting what they're seeing, then they start seeing that world in a different way. It's detail, it's color, it's texture. There is there's a thing that happens when you're looking at someone through a lens that is different than when you're looking at them with your eyes. Because you're deliberately cutting off the extraneous stuff. You're focusing on them within composition. You're seeing them in different detail. And I started gravitating towards that, as an experience, and that led me to go to film school because I like movies a lot, and it kind of like went from there, But I can't say that there's a singular work that's dog-eared and faded that's in my backpack that I always refer to, when I'm looking for inspiration. There are films that were powerful
That works.
experiences for me. Like Apocalypse Now, for instance, was a really powerful experience.
Yes.
Coppola's work, The Godfather, like stuff like that. As I got a little older, when I was in film school and I was in the middle of like studying the craft of cinema while looking at things, I was gaining an appreciation for Kubrick. So yeah, I mean, like all the things, right? Like those kind of filmmakers. Michael Mann is probably my favorite filmmaker. I
Oh,
remember
he
seeing
is goaded.
Manhunter. Well, when I was a kid, I remember seeing Manhunter because I read Thomas Harris's Red Dragon and liked it a lot, right? So then
Yep.
Manhunter was like on NBC or something. I was watching it, and I was on a podcast with this brilliant critic, Katie Walsh, and she was describing Manhunter as like watching a film, and it kind of feels like you're having a psychological break, right? And that was sort of like my child's mind experience with this weird serial killer movie called Manhunter. And so yeah, so Man's work, really really speaks to me a lot. But yeah, I can't really say there's like one singular thing. It's just sort of, I think, a kid that spent a lot of time looking and not participating but seeing detail, then wanting to refine the experience of watching through a camera. Also deeply interested in human psychology and human frailty and all of those things, and porting that interest through storytelling. I think that's how the cake started to get baked.
Well, one of the names that pops up early into your foray into the realm of comics is Ron Mars,
Mhm.
creator of one of my all-time favorite characters, Kyle Rayner. Um, in those early stages, what were the most important nuggets that you were taking away from those experiences?
Well, Ron was really instrumental in terms of my development as a comic writer, because comics were very opaque uh, to me. I mean, I'd gone through film school, so I had a sense of how feature filmmaking worked, less of a sense of how television worked. Television was still pretty opaque, but some of a sense of that. I had no idea how comics worked, and I just didn't feel like I was welcome in the business for a long time. I'd met Matt Hawkins, Top Cow publisher, and no one liked him, and we were just having some conversations, and there was room for a short story or something in a book, and I really wanted to do it. And there's a guy, Rob Levin, who's a writer and an editor, but he was an editor over at Top Cow at the time. He had room at the end on this short story, and I think Ron's like, I don't know, Witchblade something or other. And then Ron was just really helpful. You know, he showed me his comic book format and was just super positive and helped me out with issues of efficiency on the page and that kind of thing. And, you know, and all you really need in any sort of endeavor is one person who's accomplished to take their time with you and it kind of help you up a little bit, right? You get that experience. That's kind of enough to get you going. If you have, you know, any gas in your tank, that's the cord yank that gets the engine going. You know, you just need that one person whose work you admire, who takes their time and says, you know, hey, you got the goods, but here's some things you can work on, and they're really positive. And so Ron was the first creator in comics that was like that for me. You know, and I remember everybody who was that person for me in various ways. Whether it's like Mark Verheiden when he hired me to work on Ash versus Evil Dead, or Greg Walker when he hired me on Titans. You know, and I spent 5 years on that show, going from staff writer, you know, up to high producer level on that thing, right? And so I do always keep in mind the people, you know, who gave me that experience of feeling the possibility of things.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind me saying, you're one of those for me right now. Sorry.
Well, good. I'm glad I can.
There.
I'm glad I can be part of a positive cycle.
Absolutely, paying it forward, right?
Mm-hmm.
But while we are on the topic of Titans, a show I absolutely love, you've had the opportunity to write Batman, arguably
Sure.
the most popular character in comics, and also doubled down by having written him for television.
Right.
Now, having worked with Ian Glenn on Titans, I was curious, what was the feeling for you to have a living, breathing Bruce to give voice to? Like an actor with such gravitas.
It was, you know, it's kind of fascinating, right? Like, and I was always a Batman fan growing up. And I was a kid, 12 years old, with a Batman t-shirt. You know, I could probably recite the entire dialogue from the 1989 Burton Batman.
Yeah.
You know, if I sat and thought about it, you know, I could probably do that. You know, I mean, I have a scrapbook at my mother's home that has ticket stubs from both of the Burton Batman films and clippings from magazines about it. A little photo book that's just like this, like kind of treasured book. I was looking at it when I was back for Christmas, and you know, just thinking about, you know, that kid and what I wound up being able to do. You know, so fortunate to be able to work on these characters, you know, in television, you know, on the page in comics, and so you really you're just filled with gratitude about the whole thing, and that's really the dominant emotion, is just like you're just grateful to be here, you know, because I work hard and maybe I have some talent, who knows, right? But like there are other people who work hard who have a lot of talent, and for various reasons they just never got their shot, right? Or maybe they got their shot, but then something happened in their lives and they couldn't really pursue it, right? You know, you can't fall into narcissism and think like, well, I made this happen, I did this. Well, you know, you did, but like other things happened, things lined up, you know, so on and so forth. So you know, the gratitude is like the dominant emotion I try to have, you know, throughout all of my creative processes, right? Because fear and gratitude can't live in the same place.
No.
And I'd much rather have space occupied by gratitude than space occupied by fear, right? So yeah, I mean, you know, I was working with Ian Glenn, like that's insane, you know, and I remember having like a martini with him after the show, and he's just giving me beautiful anecdotes about like Game of Thrones, and you know, and that's a wonderful thing. So yeah, I mean, you know, it's a part of that like magical realism that exists in this business when you're so lucky to be able to get there.
Absolutely. Do you remember what he drank?
I don't remember what he drank. He might not have had anything, you know. Come to think, it was in like a hotel lobby. There were a lot of the cast was there, you know, like Brenton was there, Ian was there, Minka was there, you know, Akiva Goldsman was there, Greg Walker was there. So like we had kind of cordoned off a section of, I think it was the Shangri-La Hotel over in Toronto. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, and, and everyone was kind of glad handing and telling tales with like chicken wings and French fries on the table, and it was a fun time. It was a fun time in Canada.
So hey, Canada's always a fun time, folks.
Yeah, I like it there.
Wherever you're coming.
I'm a big fan. I got a
That's
movie that I wanna get up. Hopefully, I can get the movie up next year. And Toronto is one of the places I'm looking at shooting. Because I just love the way it looks, and I know the city pretty well from a filmmaking standpoint, from working on Titans for such a long time. I just feel like it has it's. I mean, even though everything shoots there, I still feel like it has an untapped cinematic quality.
oh, absolutely.
And so so that's definitely one of the places I have in my little book. Like, man, I got to make a movie here.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. That cast in particular, they seemed like that. How do I phrase this properly? That was, in my opinion, one of the most well casted shows I can commit to memory, other than maybe Daredevil, the original 3-season run here.
Sure, sure. Well,
Um,
I got to give that credit to David Rappaport, who did a lot of the casting for like the Berlanti stuff, and then Bly also helped him. Bly's last name is escaping me, but she's lovely as well. And so they really did a lot of casting, and helped gather that cast together. But yeah, I mean, there were an interesting collection of creatives, and they each had their own perspective, and the core cast is fairly young. It's fairly young core cast,
yeah.
as like a lot of these superhero shows tend to have. But they all brought their experience there, and I think they complemented each other well. And sometimes you just get lucky, and you get special people for special jobs. I think that's kind of what we landed on there.
Oh, that's awesome, man. That sounds like a really good experience. I'm very very glad you got to have that.
Oh yeah,
Um,
it was. I mean, it really was. I mean, look, you're going to set, you're hanging out there, you're working with different television directors and seeing their approaches and problem solving and the rest of it. You get to work with various departments and solve problems. I mean, I like solving problems, right? It kind of goes back to the whole need for challenge, right? So one of the things I
right.
love about filmmaking is the constant problem solving. You never have enough money, you never have enough time. But how can you get all this done? How can you make it effective? And watch the DPs that we had were brilliant, are brilliant filmmakers, and to kind of see what they prioritize aesthetically and how that all worked. It's just was a really enriching experience. I mean, I wouldn't feel confident about directing a film if I hadn't spent so much time on Titans, right? Like, I wouldn't
Right.
really be trying to uh, push this next phase of my career into motion if I hadn't spent so much time on set and gained a lot of what I think is useful perspective by agreeing with choices, disagreeing with choices, confronting problems and solving those problems, right? Like, and that's what helps you, I think, develop your own voice,
Hmm.
is deciding, through practice, okay, I like this, I don't really respond like that to that. That's going to guide it. Yeah, so it was a wonderful experience. Wonderful experience.
So, from the information that you glean from that process and
Hmm.
stepping into the director's chair yourself, how do you reconcile a transition from being a writer to directing, or is that just all part and parcel of the directing package,
Well,
should we say?
I don't really look at it in terms of transition. It's sort of like, I don't look at film directing like being a dentist. Like, going to go to a school, I'm going to do some practice, get a certificate, and now I'm a dentist and patients come in, right? Like, films aren't like the patients that come into the dentist's office. Like, I have a movie I want to direct. And so, in the context of the script that I have finished, this is a movie I want to direct. So in this context, I am director. Um, but I still like am deeply interested in solely writing things as well, right? Like, it's so I don't think it's like a stepping away from one thing into another thing, as much as every film is its own creative endeavor. right? Like if you wake up one morning and there's a melody and it's in your head and it's in the shower and it's still in your head, and then when you're driving home from wherever you're going and it's still in your head and you decide to sit down at a piano and work it out, doesn't mean that you're like I've transitioned from podcast person to musician. It just means you had a song you wanted to write, right? Like that's really what it means. I want to write this song,
absolutely.
right? So, and that's how I look at it. And I think that's what's really important to me, right? Because I want, like writing is a solo effort. I mean, you collaborate in the sense you get notes from executives, you get notes from editors, and all of that, and you go back and forth. But you're really fighting the battle by yourself. You're sitting at a computer, or a typewriter if you're a crazy person, but you're sitting somewhere and you're just battling the blank page, getting it out there, refining it, and all of that. It's a lot of an army of one. That experience. Making a film is always a hugely collaborative effort. I mean, depending on the scope of what you're doing, you're talking about millions of dollars going into an endeavor, 200, 250, 300 people, 300 lives, right? That are all aligning from, the PA who's doing the coffee run, to the director of photography who's waiting for the perfect light so that you can say action, right? It's everyone kind of coming together to do a thing like that. And I feel like if you are directing a thing, you really do need to have a singular, surpassing passion for the endeavor you're doing. And that's way more important than focusing on the title of it, focusing on what word is in the back of the chair, that frankly, I think if you're directing well, you should probably not be using the chair all that much. I think you should probably be on your feet up there and standing next to the camera, giving the actors a constant audience and paying attention. This whole I'm going to go to Video Village and I'm just going to sit here and then, and I'm going to yell. I'm going to use a CB to get someone else to give the note in to the actor because I'm just watching all my monitors. Like that's not, no, I think it's a contact sport. Like you need to be up there in the mix, really being able to be present that way. And it's a stamina thing, and so, I can only look at an endeavor as an endeavor. So when I'm writing a comic book, I'm just approaching as a writer. I'm just trying to write the best comic book I can, best issue of Blade to give to Elena so Elena can do her best work. If I'm writing a screenplay, I'm a screenwriter. If I'm working in a novel, I'm a novelist. And if I'm directing a film, I'm a director. But I think identity comes through action. And so that's kind of how I look at it. So, I'm a weird guy. Like I can make a movie. Let's say I make this movie and it's cross my fingers, for some reason it comes together and it's good. I might not make another one for like 5 years. Who knows? I can't guarantee. I'm like Terrence Malick. Like I might just go away and go to like Austin or something. What I mean? Who knows? But yeah, it's endeavor by endeavor. That's how I look at it.
So you're just flexing a different creative muscle.
I think so. I think so because I think that helps maintain your humility.
Absolutely, and that's something that's very important to maintain.
It's critical. I think when you start thinking about yourself, well, I'm at this now. It's like, but if you start thinking about like, I'm trying to accomplish this now.
Yes.
Right. That's a different mindset. And it's less about ego and more about, what is beneficial to the overall goal. Right. So like if an actor's note comes in, the scene, Brian, I don't know, like, this thing I'm doing, I say this thing and I pick up this thing. It's not really, is there another way we can approach it, or I have an idea about it? Or I was thinking last night in the hotel room and I, kind of working it out with my girlfriend and we do. If you're so title focused on, I'm a writer director and I wrote the script, anything is going to feel threatening, right? Because now, you're encroaching on my real estate, and I'm not like that. It's more like, okay, well, does that get us there?
Yes.
This is what I'm trying to accomplish in the scene. So now that you know what I'm trying to accomplish in the scene, is there a way that what you want to do, let's see if that can get us there, right? Which is, I think, it creates just a better collaborative environment.
Oh, absolutely. And it gets people more on board with the final picture. You get people on your team, and it's much easier to craft the product that way.
Same thing in comics, too. Like, I'm not dictatorial. When I write a comic, I try to keep a lot of white on the page in terms of the script, try to make sure the story is clear. that the character motivations are clear, the dialogue is there, that there is indication of what's happening, like physical action panel to panel. But I don't indicate angle. I don't really. I mean, I might say close or medium, but not so much in a dictatorial way. It's more of just, here is the pace of the editing of the comic book that I have in my head, dear artist. You do not have to follow this, but I want you to see what I'm seeing in my head, so you can decide if you want to engage that or you don't want to engage that. Or, many roads lead to Athens. So if you can show someone Athens, they may not walk the path that you walk, but they'll get there, right? And so that's what I do. But I tell everyone, like, don't, this isn't dictatorial. Like, if you think you can get these two panels done in one, get it done in one. And if you think a long shot's better than the close up, then do a long shot. You have to always make sure your collaborators have room to express.
Absolutely. Can we talk about the cover of issue 1?
Oh, yeah.
My God.
Super cool.
Like, I was floored when I saw that. It immediately jumps into my top 10 comic covers of all time. Like, just the angle of it, the way the blood was just splashing on certain parts, the washed out effect of the rain splashing, like, that was just the coolest cover I've seen in years.
Well, one of the craziest things about comics is it's like the most cost-effective way to own incredible illustration that you can really have, in the world, right? I mean, some of these illustrations are just objectively amazing pieces of art, right?
Absolutely.
And we get used to them because we go into comic book shops and we're inundated, and there's 150 of them screaming back at us with price points and issue numbers and the rest of it. But, I always take a moment to just look at something from a purely illustrative kind of point of view and seeing like the strength in there, because comics is a visual medium. Film is a visual medium, ultimately, right? And so the writing is there to help blueprint the visual narrative experience. I mean, that is the job when you're writing stories, to be visualized. Yeah, and I mean, it's just, it's a really, really, really cool cover. And and I never know what the companies are going to do. Not because they don't tell me, because I honestly, I don't ask. I figure, yeah, it's not my floor.
Just
like,
stand in your lane.
Yeah. It's like, I'm not going to have a ton of input on like the bus poster for a movie I direct. Get good marketing people. They know what they're doing. Let them work. Right. It's kind of my philosophy around the whole thing. So same thing with comics. I don't really know. I don't know how many covers they're going to get, who's going to do what variant or whatever. Like, just like what happens is what happens. So it's a surprise to me too. But I think that typifies what I'm trying to do with Blade, is have like a stark, kind of culturally sexy, fast moving, violent, but in a fun, kind of effervescent way experience, right? To try to match the feeling I had when I watched the Stephen Norrington film back in the 90s, which was really my first genuine introduction to the character. I didn't start reading The Wolfman until after the film came out. So, yeah, I mean, that was kind of what I talked to Marvel about from the beginning, was I want this to be kind of pulpy, like a little manga, like
that's
like
what this character's built for, though.
Like a fun read on the subway. I lived in New York for 10 years, right? And so comics,
Yeah.
I would always read comics on the subway. And so I wanted to make something that was a good subway read. And I hadn't really done that for a bit. I certainly don't think I've approached something this way for the big two work that I've done. So that, yeah, again, that's an interesting challenge, and that's what drew me to want to do it. And that's kind of the way I've been approaching it and enjoying it.
That's awesome, man. Well, you're absolutely killing it. But while we're on the New York of it all, I hear you're a hip hop head.
A little bit.
Yeah. All right. So, with the 50th anniversary of the genre upon us, I think we need to answer an important question. Now, there have been many over the years. Ether, Takeover, Big Ear Pac, East Coast versus West Coast. I mean,
Sure.
Give me the former on all three of them there. But one we don't hear often, or maybe have heard ever, but I'd love to hear your opinion on as a writer. And this is on pure talent, not discography, because it's kind of hard to match the two up. But Black Star, Mos Def, Yassine Bey,
Sure.
and Talib Kweli versus Outkast, Andre 3000, and Big Boy. On pure talent, who do you take out of that?
Well, it's a hard comparison, right?
It is.
Because Black Star to me is a little more boom bap. Like it's a different musical experience than Outkast, which is, I mean, well, it's all like kind of like the origins of everything, right? So like Black Star, were those guys East Coast guys?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I believe they're both New York.
yeah, and see, here's a, I was oh gosh, I remember where I read it. Years ago, I was reading some music criticism, and it was talking about Public Enemy,
Yeah.
and it was talking about how you can hear the New York in Public Enemy. You can hear the punctuation of the car horns and the cacophony of industrial noises, sort of like the way Terminator X would like lay those tracks out, right? And I think there's a reason why East Coast New York influence, whether you're Philly or New York or what have you, you know, uh, that music, it just has more of that metropolitan kind of urban cacophony kind of naturally woven into it, right? And which gives it a certain experience, right? A certain like gut punch on the downbeat experience, on top of, with the lyricism and all that stuff on top of it, right? But it almost feels in a lot of ways like the lyrics are pushing through the track to get to you, the same way
Yes.
you would have to overtalk a crowd on a Manhattan street, to talk to the person next to you, right? Like it's, and I think this is a psychological thing that happens from just living in New York, right? And with the Outcast stuff, you've got like a lot of Southern influence there, and that's a very melodic culture, right? It's very like, kind of a 12-bar blues and the call and response of gospel, and that sort of thing. So it's so very different. It's hard for me to really compare, right? I mean, I probably personally listen to Black Star more, um, just because of the nature of the work I do,
Yeah.
uh, 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 rather than like the effervescence of Outcast, which I like a lot.
Yeah.
But I'm usually doing hard driving, character driven genre stuff where I'm chewing on bolts and ice cubes. So, the punchier, I think the
Yeah.
the better for me in terms of lining it up while I write. And music is really something that I experience with writing a lot. They're very connected for me. So, it's rare that I'm just listening to something to just listen to it. It's more
Yeah.
of what am I going to put on while I'm working, right? And so that's kind of where I do.
Oh, absolutely. And now I'm getting this correct. You are a musician as well.
I mean, that's a look. Wikipedia says things, and I don't know, like, kind of where that page came from. Okay, so I have written some music. I did some underground, kind of weird burial esque, kind of you know synth drum and bass type stuff. I've messed around with like some dark pop electronica, like some Phil Collins meets Joy Division style stuff. I mean, there's stuff that's out there on the internet. I'm not going to tell you where it is, but it's out there on the internet. And I've produced a little hip hop for friends back in St. Louis, where I'm from. There's
Yeah.
big hip hop culture there. So, I've done a little bit of that, but I wouldn't say musician. I'd say I'm familiar with music, and I make some from time to time. Um, like there's a kind of synth noir artist who I'm a huge fan of, Kid Moxie, and looking to collaborate with her on some kind of film project or what have you, because I just love the nature of her music, right? I
Yeah.
know enough about music to be able to speak to her in some of her own grammar,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't. I'm not going to walk into a music studio with an actual musician there and claim to be, a black belt in the dojo. I am not. I just know some karate. You know.
So what turns you crank musically? What are you into?
I mean, these days I'm listening to a lot of 80s music and 80s inspired music. Really, I mean for me, the cinema of the 80s, just as a thing, it will probably always be my strongest creative influence.
Nice.
because that was how I grew up experiencing, films. Um,
Mhm.
the era of the VHS, the Betamax to the VHS, and then that one kid had the laser disc, and you were like, "Ooh, you got the laser disc!
Yes.
Ooh, his parents got money. He got the laser disc, man. He ain't playing around with the laser disc, man." Um, so like, yeah, I mean, it's just hugely influential on me, as a storyteller. And when I was a kid, I didn't have a ton of money, and so it wasn't like I was going and seeing the same movie over and over and over again. I could, like, well, luckily I had a great mom that made sure that I could go see the ones I wanted to see in the theater, and I would go. But it wasn't like I was going to do that over and over and over and over again. So what I would do is when I saw a movie I liked, I'd go to the library. There's a walkable library. I've always had a walkable library from where I lived, which is
Smart.
probably a big part of why I'm what I am, right? So shout out to libraries. Um, but what I would do is I would go check out the album, the soundtrack album from the library, because back then they would get copies of all the latest albums, right? So like Flashdance, Ghostbusters, like whatever it is, right? And then have like Bond soundtracks and things like that. All the John Williams stuff, E.T., Indiana Jones, Star Wars. Like, you get these LPs, and so you check them out. I think you could get like 5 or something at a time, or like 3 or something at a time. So
Purple
I would
Rain.
bring Purple Rain, yeah, for sure, Purple Rain. I mean, any and all, right? Any and all, like all the John Hughes stuff. Nightmare on Elm Street. Nightmare on Elm Street, Dream Warriors, #3. Listening to Dokken, like whatever. So you would get these records, and I had this little Fisher Price record player. It was kind of like a eggshell white with an orange a needle drop bar, right, on it. And it could, you screw the thing up, it could do a 45. You screw it down, you could do a 33. It was a whole thing, right? And I think it had a built-in speaker. I'm sure it sounded like trash, but to me it was like Dolby 5.1 because I was a kid.
Yeah,
And
man.
the way I would re-experience films would be like taking these records and putting them on and just sitting down and just listening to them, and as I
Yeah.
listened to the soundtracks, I'd see the images in my mind, and it was a way I could revisit the movie, right? That's how I could see the movie over and over again in my head. And then then I got a little older, then I had like a little double cassette deck thing, and I would check out the tapes of the soundtracks from the library. And then you do the thing where you play on this side and play and record on the other side, and then now you got your own tape, right? And so I was building up this library of just like taped soundtracks and things like that. Again, just like really, re-experiencing these movies through the music, which gave me a deep
Yeah.
love of music, because I was experiencing films that way. But also kind of connected music and storytelling for me in a critical way, right?
Right.
So yeah, like that's kind of why I have like this big passion for that. So yeah, I listen to a lot of synthwave stuff, like new stuff like Thought Beings and Motion Epic, The Midnight, Primo the Alien, like I said, Kid Moxie, she's great. A Mortal Girlfriend, like these kind of like the modern sort of synthwave, kind of the revisitation, Kavinsky, get like a bigger artist, what have you, the revisitation of this stuff. But then I also still listen to the classic stuff. Like last night when I was walking the dogs, I had a playlist, and I think I went through like, Cruel Summer, Shout, anything, so we're on like a Bananarama, Tears for Fears, Drama
Yeah.
Rama, thing. A lot of Phil Collins, I was in
Yep.
an Uber the other day listening to I Don't Care Anymore, on
Nice.
a loop. So yeah, there hasn't been a bad day in my life that In the Air Tonight hasn't made a little better. So yeah, I mean that's I'm kind of stuck there. I always joke that like if I meet Tarantino, because I never met
Yeah.
Tarantino. Well, no, I met him once, but I was very, very brief.
Ah!
But very brief. But if I ever got into like a deep, like put it on YouTube conversation with Tarantino, he could wipe the floor with me with 60 cinema and 70 cinema.
Yeah.
I'm a fan of that stuff. I've seen a lot of the Luminary's work there. I appreciate it, but I don't have the deep knowledge he has of that stuff. but
Oh, he's a
I don't know if he
beast.
can beat me in the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, Quentin. I don't know if you're gonna lap me in the 80s, bro. Like, I think if we get to the 80s, I think I got you, man. I think I can at least keep up if I can't surpass. He's not gonna, leave me looking at taillights. So yeah, that's my thing.
There we go. We'll have to set that match up here.
Right on. Right on.
Oh, that's good. Well,
Put
that
on
was
YouTube.
yeah. There we go. There you go. I can referee
Yeah.
that shit.
I mean, he would be just like, okay, I don't understand why this like comic book guy wants to like, okay, right? So this comic book guy wants to talk to me about movies, okay? And I mean, it's kind of cool. Maybe I could do it. Maybe I could do it. You know.
Ah, that's fantastic.
No, I don't know. I don't know if he would be interested in that. You know.
Oh Jesus! Well, while we're on the Hollywood of it all here,
Yeah.
in regards to the SAG-AFTRA strike,
Sure.
I know there's a lot that can't be said, but I
Sure.
would love to give you this platform to get your perspective out there for people, so they can hear from an actual person involved in the process and not just gleaning their information from the think pieces online.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what do you have like a question specifically, or you just want like a little Bryan Hill editorial and thing?
Just kind of the overview from your perspective of things, and I mean the unfair treatment when it comes to the new streaming things, the
Sure.
AI of it. I
Well,
just
okay. I mean, look,
what are your thoughts on it?
I guess in the macrocosmic, what we have to remember is that technology has always affected both the art and the business of filmmaking. I mean, initially films were short, black and white, and quiet, with live orchestras playing, because sound wasn't a thing, right? And then sound comes in, then color comes in, then running time, gets standardized in a way, and then television hits, then home video hits, right? Then the internet shows up, and so it's a constantly evolving process. Whether you're talking about shooting 35 millimeter 4 perf or whatever it is, right? Spending thousands of dollars a minute just on stock from Kodak, and that was the way you had to make a thing, or now you're talking about getting the Blackmagic Cinema Pocket Camera 4K, and kind of shooting with that, or even shooting, like a Sean Baker Tangerine style movie on your iPhone, right? And then and shooting it that way, you can cut it in your iPhone, you can distribute it in your iPhone, right? So technology has always changed filmmaking and the business of filmmaking and where profit lies. So I think these are the growing pains of a business in evolution, basically. And compensation is a real issue. It, being able to make sure that work that is successful, that's getting seen by a lot of people, that the people that contributed to that work are compensated effectively. I think that's a really important issue.
Absolutely.
I think people like Justine Bateman, who is not only like a phenomenal actor, and I believe she's a director as well. She's also got like a degree in computer science or something like that. Like, she's kind of brilliant, and she's been talking a lot about AI and its implications and the risks of that, and why we need to have hard and fast rules in place before the proliferation of this tech gets out of control. So
Absolutely.
I think these are all like really important issues. I'm not the most sanguine about it, mainly because I view this still as a business negotiation. I don't view this as a civil war between one side and another side, but we have to figure out a way to make this business equitable and sustainable.
Absolutely.
In order to make the best content we can, and make sure that audiences are still entertained. On a personal level, I am concerned about budgeting. I'm concerned about these massive, massive spends and the relentless kind of escalation of budget spends, because I feel like that's going to make it really difficult to make a thing. I mean, I have other concerns. Like, I'm concerned about the way we develop actors and celebrities now, because it used to be that, like, Tom Cruise shows up in all the right moves, has a moment, Risky Business has a moment, taps. I'm probably getting them out of order, but smaller movies, micro vehicles, right? Like Cocktail, like little things, and then he'll do that. Then he'll play Vince in The Color of Money with Paul Newman, and part of the reason why he's such a phenomenally skilled celebrity, and that's a separate task from acting, right? Being a skilled celebrity is a whole different thing than being an actor. One of the reasons why he is so skilled at utilizing his celebrity to make his films have cultural importance is because of all of this experience he's had making these films and kind of growing into the icon that is Tom Cruise. Now we don't make those movies anymore, right? You don't make a Cocktail anymore, right? You don't make, the smaller pictures that add up, and build recognition and build box office strength, so that when you're making a Top Gun or a Days of Thunder or a Mission Impossible 1 or whatever it is, you've got this library of these things. And so the way that actors are kind of grown and then slotted into superhero movies, but then the character is really the celebrity, not necessarily the actor, so that actor doesn't have the same box office draw where they're not playing the character, so on and so forth. We're not building a bench.
Yes.
It concerns me that this many years on, 2023, we're not really having a conversation about who's the next Pacino, who's the next De Niro. But we're not really. Yeah, right. Rest in peace, right? But
yeah, absolutely.
But we're also not making those movies, right? That helped forge them into who they are, so there are some creative concerns I have, and I think a lot of it is the bull rush towards insurance against failure, which is what creates the dependence upon intellectual property. It prevents a lot of investment at the studio level into some of the smaller films that they would have made before, new ideas they would have made before. I'm concerned that we are remaking and rehashing and reimagining, but we're not building a bench of new ideas. We're not building a bench of new IPs, and not to get into the deep weeds of the business too much, but because of the nature of the business and the way things cost and the way the studio system works, a lot of the smaller producers that were responsible for some of the movies we loved growing up, like your RoboCops and your Conan the Barbarians and all that, those they don't really exist in the same way anymore. I mean, they can make a movie, but it might go straight to streaming and might get buried. You may not see it and all that. Like the forces that came together to make Highlander, it's a little different now. So a movie like that may not happen. I mean, yeah, they're going to remake Highlander because it existed, but the new Highlander, right? The new Terminator, I know there's a new James Cameron out there somewhere that's got some fantastic science fiction film that they want to get off of the ground, but it's hard in this marketplace to get the first Terminator done. They would rather remake Terminator or make another Terminator sequel than spend the $6 million, $7 million, $8 million, $12 million, whatever it is, to get the new Terminator type thing off of the ground. And I feel like we are starting to cannibalize the business in a way. So I'm hoping that the result of the strike, when all the hurt feelings get done and the hyperbole dies down, there's a more conscientious climate around how much things need to cost. Instead of spending $300 million in this thing, maybe we can amortize that across 3 shows that only cost $100 million each to make. And maybe we can bring these budgets down a little bit, but we can also provide more variety and start launching new careers and making new creatives and doing that. So that's my hope, a naive hope as it is, but that's my hope.
Well, I don't necessarily think it's a naive hope. Without hope, how can we move forward?
Without hope, what would we be?
So when it comes to this, I mean, if like you said, once the hurt feelings are gone, it would be what are the chances, do you think, of a creative renaissance across the board? Because the financials could be, let's just assume that when this ends, the financials are set in place where it doesn't become a concern anymore and people can just be free to do the creative.
Well, I mean, I think, look, people want to create, right? Like that's the thing. And I think there will be definitely a resurging interest, in creating things after having a forced pause for such a long time in relative terms to the business of Hollywood. So yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm hoping so for sure. definitely the opportunity is there. It's just look, we have to. Hollywood's still figuring out how the ecosystem works because this is a new thing. I mean, when I was growing up, a movie came out in the theater, it had a theatrical run, and then it would take like a year.
Yeah, man, like 8 months to a year.
Yeah, to get to another platform where you could experience it again. Whether it was pay cable or VHS or something. Like you weren't going to see that movie. A movie came out in 1987, and you missed it in the theater. It was going to be 88.
Yep.
When you could try to rent that tape, right? And it was going to be late 88 before it was going to hit cable, or 89, right? So there was a longer tail with this stuff. But day and date releasing, multi-platform releasing, also when you were watching it at home, you're watching it on a 4:3 screen with very low resolution. So you weren't even getting the full experience of it. Maybe you had, you got the letterbox version, so you had the black bars at the top and the bottom. But even then, it was, now you got big 4K TVs, 80-inch, 100-inch, 120 inches. Like those are more cost effective. So people are building more robust home theaters now than they used to. So it's all shifting, and the cultural importance of cinema is shifting too, right? So everyone is trying to kind of figure this out at the same time. So I do think that there will be a creative renaissance. I do think you're going to see probably a crop of new creators who are embracing the chaos of the current, business of Hollywood in an interesting, creative way. I do think those projects will likely start to emerge once the strike is complete.
Yeah, we're seeing the next Metropolis, not the next Metropolis remake.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, right? In some form, hopefully.
Absolutely. Well, while we're on the Hollywood adult, is there anything you'd like to plug here? Is there anything that you are able and allowed to plug? I want you to just go ham here. Anything that you were working on, from Blade to anything else, this is your time.
Well, I mean, I'm not really allowed to talk about some of the stuff I'm working on, as you can imagine. But Blade is still ongoing, and really excited about that. And so, for anyone interested in that or some of my other work, you can always follow me on Twitter, Twitter or X or whatever it's called now. It's easy. It's just at Bryan Edward Hill, just my name, at Bryan Edward Hill. You can find me there. I'll take this time to plug the work of a few friends. I think Ben Percy's work on Ghost Rider and Wolverine, I think it's awesome. So I think everyone should check out what Ben's doing there. I'm really, really excited to see what David P. Post does with the Punisher. He's got a Punisher book coming out, so let's see what's going on there. That's the stuff I'm really kind of looking towards at the moment. But yeah, just find me on Twitter at Bryan Edward Hill. I'm talking a lot of movies now, talking a lot of filmmaking now, but I also still talk comics. And so join me there. I have great discussions. I'd love to see.
Well, I can absolutely co-sign that he is an amazing follow on Twitter, without which I would not have been able to get this interview. So
Twitter brings the worlds together.
It does.
It still does. It still does. A lot of nonsense, and there's a lot of friction, unnecessary friction, and all of that. And the actual functionality of Twitter is a little matchsticks and bubblegum these days. But beyond all that, I made great connections on Twitter with great people like you, with people who've read my work, with creatives I've admired for a long time and had some nice in-depth discussions with them. So I still recommend the platform. I just jank. Like I recommend it, but you will encounter jank, psychological jank, user interface jank, just jank across the board.
So if you set that janky bar at a respectably low enough level and go into it with those expectations, it's great, man. For what it is, it still accomplishes everything I needed to do with it. Just...
Go in expecting a mess. And don't wear your favorite suit.
You're gonna get a little something on that.
You're gonna get a little something on it. And like when you dance with Twitter, Twitter doesn't change. Twitter changes you.
Absolutely.
So
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on today and sharing your time with us, Mr. Bryan Edward Hill. And anything else you'd like to say before we sign off here?
No, just thank you so much for having me. This has been great. And I appreciate everyone who's listened to me, on this thing. And just want everyone to have a good day and stay positive and stay productive and just want the best for all of you.
What more can I say? Have a great day, folks.